Welcome to another episode of the Scribblesworth podcast. And today we are going to talk about the second book of the Drymere series by Tim McKay called Seas of the Zovah. And if you read the first book, that is Rise of Dresca, if you haven't, please go and read it. And for those who are like, why should I read this book that I've never heard about this author that I never heard about? Why should I care? Well, to tell you, first, it is fantasy. Wow, fantasy. But the thing is, it is a non-romantic, full of action fantasy. I'm calling this category now, given that there are more books coming out like this by male authors. I'm calling fantasy for boys or fantasy for men, because fantasy normally is really romantic, but these books are not. So if you want a high intensity, really fast paced book series and a book that doesn't have like kisses, well, Rise of Dresca is a great start. It's an amazing start. It's just simply amazing. And the Drymere series, forgive me if I'm telling this wrong, the Drymere series is one of the best series I've read this year. Like, it is in the top 2 fantasy series that I've read this year. Top 2, okay? So, The Seas of the Zovah is a continuation of the first book, that Rise of Dresca. We have reviewed that. If you haven't, the links are, if you haven't seen or heard or view our reviews, well, you have the link to the podcast and the written reviews down below. So this will help you get into the book. If you then have to read the book, that would be awesome. So Seas of Zovah, being the continuation of it, is kind of a strategic book. This book is a strategic one because the author couldn't follow up the plot much. He couldn't advance the plot much because there were so many questions in the first book. That if he didn't answer on this book, well, the series would be fucked up. So Tim McKay was forced to answer a lot of questions of the second book, introduce a lot of questions to this book and the third book, and then advance the plot a little bit. If we're going to say that Rise of Dresca, the first book, went from 0 to 10, Seas of the Zovah went from 10 to 13. Okay, 10 to 13, 10 to 14. So this is it. But the thing is, it's not like the book sucks. The book doesn't suck. The book is actually very amazing. There are a lot of fighting scenes. There's a lot of death. Fortunately or unfortunately, there are new demons on the series. There's a new dragon. There's a new dragon companion for Dresca. There's actually a new dragon, and you guys will love it. He just appears. It's a red dragon. It just appears. Okay, so you see like, oh my God, dragons are fighting, and you see the black dragon, and then you have the red dragon fighting alongside the black dragon. So there's that spoiler, but it's not a big spoiler. So yeah, and then there's a sci-fi element to it. I know it's fantasy, but there's a sci-fi element to it that Tim McKay introduced in order to explain something that he said on the first book, and to clear a lot of things and to travel, like to put the path to the third book. It is very important, and it's about the death of Dresca. And we get so many elements on this book. We get elements of why the spheres work, how they work. We get a more in-depth explanations of the crystals. you could see that the crystals were a central element to the book, and we see that the crystals have a big connection with the dragons. On this second book, you get a wider perspective on both the dragons, the crystals, the dromadaires, or the strains of power. We get more monsters, and we get a major tier demon. Okay, so imagine that we are all the monsters that we've seen so far are level 1. And in this book we get a level 4 type of demon. Yeah, it's the Zovah. But what is the Zovah? It's a demon, a very powerful demon. In this book, you will get a lot of explanations. You will get really in depth in the book. You will get a better foothold in the series. You still will get a lot of action, a lot of fights, a lot of sword fights, and betrayal. You will find a lot of betrayal. So you guys should get the book. It's very intense, very straightforward. This book is great. So grab your books, say hi to the author, follow him on Twitter. I will leave the links below. There's an interview about the author as well that he's talking about his books. Great interview on YouTube. You should watch that as well, because you get to know a lot about the author, and he explains a lot on the series, a lot on the books, and they talk about they even talk about music. So there's that. So this is it for the episode, guys, and I'll see you guys on the next book. Subscribe and see you guys on the next episode.